Girl boss culture is so dead. There has been a cultural shift that nobody can deny, especially on social media, of women and their aprons, baking sourdough, caring for their husbands, talking about their dream of being a stay-at-home wife. It is no secret that women are embracing their femininity more and realizing that this whole lie that your career is everything and it's the most important thing in your life was exactly that. It was a huge lie.
There is a quiet realization spreading right now, and it is not being discussed openly because it makes people uncomfortable. It is the realization that many choices sold as empowerment came with hidden costs, and those costs are now coming due. For many women, the life they were promised does not look like the life they are living. Stay with me to the end of this video, because what we are going to unpack today is not about blame. It is about consequences, timing, and the reality that no one warned them about. Before we get into this, make sure you like the video, share it, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell and select all so you get every Angry Guy video the moment it is released. If you want more direct conversations like this that cut through the noise, you do not want to miss future uploads. I also want you to check out Angry's Crypto Academy, which is linked in the description of this video. The Academy is designed to help you protect and safeguard your assets and learn how to buy, sell, and trade crypto in a world that is becoming increasingly unstable. If you care about your future and your independence, go check it out now. And if you are enjoying these Angry Guy videos and want to show support, you can buy me a Red Bull using the link in the description. That support helps keep this channel going. Now, let us begin. There is a generation of women right now quietly realizing that something went wrong. Not because they failed, not because they did not work hard enough, but because the roadmap they were given led them somewhere they never expected to end up. Many were told that prioritizing career above all else would unlock freedom, fulfillment, and long term security. They were told that family could wait, that relationships were optional, that independence was the ultimate achievement. And for a time, it felt true. Promotions came, salaries increased, titles stacked up, applause followed. But time has a way of revealing what applause cannot. As women move into their 30s and 40s, a different reality begins to surface. The career they built does not come home with them at night. The company they gave their best years to does not sit beside them when they are sick, stressed, or uncertain about the future. The calendar keeps moving forward, and opportunities that once felt infinite begin to narrow. This is not a moral judgment, it is biology, economics, and social structure intersecting in ways that cannot be negotiated away. Many women were never told that delaying family building is not a neutral choice, it is a trade. You trade time for money, fertility for flexibility, companionship for autonomy, and like all trades, it comes with risk. After the mid 30s, pregnancy becomes more difficult, more medically complex, and more emotionally taxing. This is not an insult, it is medical reality. Yet for decades, this information was softened, delayed, or reframed so it would not interfere with the preferred narrative. What makes this especially painful is that many women believed they were choosing strength only to later discover they were choosing solitude without fully understanding what that meant long term. Solitude is not the same experience for everyone. Men and women experience isolation differently, process stress differently, and draw meaning from different sources. This does not make one superior to the other. It means pretending both are interchangeable was never honest. Men historically have learned to exist with minimal emotional support. Many men grow up understanding that if they fail, they fall alone. They build internal systems to cope with pressure, silence, and responsibility. Women, historically, have built meaning through relationships, family bonds, and social connection. Removing that foundation and replacing it with corporate achievement was always going to create a gap that a paycheck cannot fill. The corporate world does not love you back. It rewards output, not loyalty. It does not care how much of yourself you sacrifice to climb the ladder. Inflation erodes raises. Restructuring erases departments. The title you worked for becomes irrelevant the moment the market shifts. And when you step back and look around, you realize that many of the people you spent the most time with were never friends. They were coworkers. When the job ends, so does the relationship. Another reality that hits hard is the economic cost of doing life alone. Being single is expensive. Sharing resources reduces costs in ways that are not obvious when you are younger. Housing, utilities, transportation, healthcare, and daily life all cost more when carried by one person. Two people building together compound stability. One person carrying everything alone absorbs every shock directly. This is what many now refer to as the singles tax, and it is very real. The irony is that many women were told independence meant security, but now find themselves facing a future where they must work indefinitely just to maintain stability. There is no partner to share the burden when health declines, no family structure to provide support when income is disrupted, no safety net built through shared sacrifice. Independence without interdependence eventually becomes isolation. At the same time this realization is happening, something else is happening quietly among men. Men listened. For decades, men were told they were the problem, that their nature was harmful, that their presence was optional, that their masculinity was something to be corrected. They were told not to approach, not to lead, not to assert, not to exist in the ways they had been shaped to exist. And eventually, they stopped arguing. Men walked away, not in anger, not in protest, but in acceptance. They stopped trying to meet expectations that kept changing. They stopped competing for approval that was never granted. They stopped investing time, energy, and resources into systems that consistently treated them as disposable. And something unexpected happened when they did. They found peace. Being alone is not the same as feeling alone. Many men discovered that once they removed chaos from their lives, clarity replaced it. Without constant emotional negotiation, without financial extraction, without social performance, life became simpler, not empty, simpler. They focused on personal interests, health, financial stability, and quiet routines that brought contentment rather than stress. Men tend to be minimalist by nature. Remove what is unnecessary, and satisfaction increases. This is why many men walking away are not miserable. They are calm. They live smaller lives by design, not by failure. They do not need constant validation. They do not need elaborate social structures to feel grounded. They learn to trust observable reality over promises. This shift has created a stark contrast. While many women are expressing frustration about rising costs, dating exhaustion, and loneliness, many men are opting out entirely. They are no longer chasing relationships as a default. They are no longer paying for attention. They are no longer performing rituals that yield diminishing returns. They recognize that the game was structured in a way that asked them to give more while receiving less. This is not about hatred, it is about pattern recognition. Men saw that the rules were unevenly enforced, that accountability was selective, that risk was asymmetrical. They adapted accordingly. When men stop participating, the system feels the absence immediately. Fewer dates, fewer proposals, fewer shared households, fewer safety nets created through partnership. And suddenly, the structure many women relied on without realizing it begins to wobble. For generations, men absorbed the harshness of reality on behalf of women. They worked dangerous jobs. They carried financial pressure. They shielded families from instability. When that role was dismissed as unnecessary or oppressive, men eventually accepted the instruction literally. They stepped aside. And now, reality is no longer buffered. We see this reflected every day in short videos and posts from women expressing shock at how difficult life feels. The cost of living, the exhaustion, the lack of support, the feeling of being unseen. Some ask where the men went, Others demand they return. But walking away was not a tantrum, it was a conclusion. Men did not disappear. They simply redirected their attention inward. They stopped building for others and started building for themselves. They stopped apologizing for existing. They stopped negotiating their value. And once that switch flipped, it did not flip back. What many women do not yet fully grasp is that time is not reversible. You cannot reclaim the years you spent prioritizing one path over one another. You can adapt, you can adjust, but you cannot go back. This is not cruelty, it is physics. And the hardest part is realizing that the advice that shaped your choices came from people who will not share the consequences with you. The glass ceiling narrative promised fulfillment at the top, but many who reached it discovered there was nothing there that could replace family, legacy, or long term companionship. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. Just more responsibility, more pressure, and fewer people who genuinely care whether you succeed or fail. This is not a call to return to the past. It is a call to be honest about trade offs. A society that discourages cooperation between men and women cannot be surprised when both sides end up worse off in different ways. Men adapted by simplifying. Women are now facing complexity alone. And this is only the beginning, because as economic pressure increases, as systems strain, as social support weakens, the cost of fragmentation becomes clearer. Men who need little can adjust quickly. Women who rely on broader networks feel the strain sooner. This is not because one is better than the other. It is because different strategies yield different outcomes under pressure. The question now is not who is right. The question is whether there is still time for honest recalibration. Whether people are willing to acknowledge reality instead of slogans, whether cooperation can be rebuilt without denial. We are watching the consequences of 50 years of messaging collide with biology, economics, and human nature. And unlike trends or ideologies, those forces do not negotiate. This conversation is uncomfortable because it challenges stories people built their identities around. But avoiding it does not make it go away. It only delays understanding until the cost is even higher. And as men continue choosing peace, simplicity, and self preservation, the gap widens. Not because men won, but because they left the table entirely. To understand how we arrived here, you have to understand how slowly this shift was introduced. None of this happened overnight. It was not a single movement, a single slogan, or a single generation making reckless decisions. It was a long process of incentives, messaging, and social conditioning that rewarded certain behaviors while quietly discouraging others. Over time, those incentives reshaped priorities, and priorities reshaped lives. For decades, women were told that relying on men was weakness, that needing partnership was dependence, that choosing family early was settling. These ideas were not always stated outright, but they were implied through praise, media representation, and cultural reinforcement. The woman who delayed commitment for a career was celebrated as disciplined and ambitious. The woman who chose marriage and children young was often portrayed as lacking drive or potential. Over time, these judgments sank in. What was rarely discussed was that men were receiving the opposite message. Men were told they were replaceable, that their traditional roles were outdated, that their value was conditional and could be revoked at any moment, that if they failed, there would be no sympathy. This created an environment where men learned to detach early, while women were encouraged to delay attachment entirely. This asymmetry mattered. When men pulled back, It was not because they wanted chaos, it was because they saw instability increasing in every major area of life. Dating became adversarial instead of cooperative. Legal structures introduced risks that were one sided. Social expectations demanded sacrifice without protection. Men adjusted the way any rational actor adjusts when the cost outweighs the benefit. They disengaged. What many people miss is that men walking away is not primarily about women at all. It is about risk management. It is about minimizing exposure to systems that penalize effort and reward compliance. Men looked at the data of their own lives and the lives of those around them. They saw divorces that wiped out decades of work. They saw false accusations destroy reputations. They saw family courts that treated fathers as optional. And they learned. At the same time, women were being told that these systems existed to protect them, that safeguards were necessary, that men as a group represented danger. This framing justified the expansion of mechanisms that assumed guilt first and defense second. But every system designed around mistrust eventually collapses under its own weight. Trust is not optional in a functioning society, it is infrastructure. Once trust erodes, cooperation stops. Once cooperation stops, fragmentation accelerates. And fragmentation is expensive emotionally and financially. It forces everyone to carry burdens that were once shared. One of the most damaging illusions sold during this period was the idea that fulfillment could be indefinitely postponed, that youth was elastic, that fertility was flexible, that emotional bonds could be formed later with the same ease as earlier. This was never true, but it was convenient to believe. Biology does not operate on ideological timelines. As women delayed family formation, the pool of available partners shrank. Men their age were either already committed, disengaged, or uninterested in long term investment. Younger men often lacked stability. Older men often had different priorities. This mismatch was predictable, yet rarely acknowledged honestly. Meanwhile, the professional world continued extracting labor, long hours, constant availability, performance metrics that ignored personal cost. Women who gave everything to their careers were praised for resilience, yet quietly burned out. The promise was that sacrifice now would lead to freedom later. But later never arrived. What arrived instead was exhaustion. There is a specific loneliness that comes from realizing you did everything you were told and still feel empty. That loneliness is harder to confront than failure because failure allows for blame. This loneliness demands accountability for choices that were encouraged, applauded, and normalized. At the same time, men who opted out began experiencing something different: relief. Without relational pressure, without constant judgment, without financial obligation beyond themselves, many men found that their stress levels dropped. They slept better. They spent less. They needed less. They regained time. This is why so many men appear calm while so many women appear overwhelmed. It is not because men are winning, it is because men reduced complexity while women absorbed it. The idea that men thrive in solitude while women struggle is not an insult. It is an observation grounded in behavioral patterns. Men often build identity through mission, work, and internal goals. Women often build identity through connection, shared experience, and relational depth. Removing those structures affects each differently. This does not mean women cannot survive alone. Of course they can. It means the cost is higher. And cost is the central theme here: cost of living, cost of time, cost of missed opportunity, cost of emotional labor, cost of isolation. These costs compound quietly until they are impossible to ignore. One of the most painful realizations many women face is that there is no rewind button. You cannot compress decades of relationship building into a few years later in life. You cannot manufacture shared history on demand. You cannot outsource companionship to convenience. These things take time, presence, and vulnerability. And when the window closes, it closes. Men understood something earlier because they had fewer illusions protecting them. They knew early on that no one was coming to save them, that if they wanted peace, they would have to build it themselves. So they did. Men simplified their lives: smaller homes, fewer possessions, fewer obligations, more control. They realized that luxury does not mean excess. Luxury means freedom from unnecessary stress. Luxury means waking up without dread. Luxury means not being pulled into constant emotional negotiation. This is why men walking away often describe their lives as peaceful rather than lonely. Peace is not loud, it does not post constantly, it does not demand validation. It simply exists. Meanwhile, many women are discovering that independence without partnership is not empowerment, it is exposure. Every problem must be solved alone. Every crisis hits harder. Every illness is navigated without backup. Every financial shock has no buffer. And as economic conditions tighten, this reality becomes sharper. Inflation erodes savings. Housing costs rise. Healthcare becomes more complex with age. Support systems shrink as friends focus on their own families. The professional world offers no compassion for burnout. And suddenly, the narrative collapses. And this is why we are seeing an increase in public expressions of frustration, not because women are weak, but because the system they trusted did not deliver what was promised. They were told that pushing men away would not matter, that men were unnecessary, that alternatives would fill the gap. Those alternatives never materialized. Men did not fight this conclusion, they accepted it. And once men accept something, they do not linger. They adapt and move forward. They do not seek validation for leaving. They do not announce it as protest. They simply withdraw investment. What women often misinterpret is silence. Silence is not confusion. Silence is decision. Like men stopped asking women on dates, stopped paying for expensive experiences, stopped competing for attention, stopped performing masculinity for approval. They realized that attention is currency and they stopped spending it where returns were negative. This withdrawal exposed another uncomfortable truth. Many women relied on male attention more than they realized, not just romantically, but socially, economically, and emotionally. When that attention disappeared, the absence was jarring. Social media amplified this shift. Platforms that once rewarded validation now amplify frustration. Videos of women expressing hardship spread rapidly, not because they are mocked, but because they reveal systemic failure. When enough people tell the same story, it stops being anecdotal. Men see these stories and feel confirmation, not guilt. They see the system functioning exactly as predicted. And because they have already detached emotionally, they do not feel responsible for fixing it. This is where the conversation becomes difficult because responsibility was never evenly distributed. Men were expected to adapt endlessly, women were encouraged to demand endlessly. That imbalance could only last as long as men participated. Now they are not. And this does not mean men are happier because women are struggling. It means men chose self preservation over sacrifice without reciprocity. There is a difference. The future many women face is not dramatic collapse, it is quiet endurance, long careers with diminishing returns, aging without family support, increased reliance on institutions that are already strained, social isolation masked by digital interaction, and a growing sense of regret that has no outlet. Regret is heavy because it cannot be externalized, it lives inside. This is why anger often follows regret. Anger seeks somewhere to go, it demands someone to blame. But blame does not restore time, it does not reverse biology, it does not rebuild trust. The hardest truth is that no one forced these choices. They were encouraged, celebrated, and normalized, but ultimately chosen. And choice always carries consequence. Men understand this intuitively because they live with consequences from an early age. Failure costs men immediately. Society does not cushion their fall. This is why men tend to accept a reality faster. Acceptance is survival. Women were shielded from consequence for a long time by systems designed to protect them. But protection without accountability creates fragility. And fragility breaks under pressure. We are now in that pressure phase. This does not mean there is no hope. It means the path forward requires honesty rather than slogans. It requires acknowledging differences rather than denying them. It requires cooperation rather than competition between genders. But cooperation cannot be forced, it must be earned. And trust must be rebuilt, not demanded. Men will not return to systems that punish them unless those systems change. Peace is too valuable to surrender. Solitude, once mastered, is not frightening. It is grounding. Women must decide whether they want independence at all costs or interdependence with accountability. Both paths are valid, but they lead to very different outcomes. Pretending they are the same is the lie that brought us here. As this reality continues unfolding, the divide will grow. Those who adapt early will suffer less. Those who cling to narratives will suffer longer. Time does not negotiate with belief. When you zoom out and look at the shift at the societal level, the implications become impossible to ignore. This is no longer about individual dating choices or personal preferences. This is about systems that were built on assumptions that are no longer true. Entire economies, housing markets, labor expectations, and social safety nets were designed around the idea that men and women would continue forming households together. When that stops happening at scale, everything downstream begins to destabilize. Dual income households were not just romantic partnerships, they were economic engines. Two people sharing expenses, labor, caregiving, and long term planning created efficiency. They stabilized neighborhoods. They sustained consumer demand. They produced the next generation. When fewer of those units exist, the strain shifts elsewhere. Housing becomes less affordable. Taxes increase to cover gaps. Social services expand to compensate for what families once handled internally. And here is the part no one prepared women for. When families disappear, the burden does not vanish, it is transferred. It is transferred to institutions, to governments, and eventually back to individuals. Independence feels empowering until the bill arrives. Many women believe they were opting out of dependence on men without realizing they were opting into dependence on systems that are far less forgiving. Employers do not care about your well being. Governments do not move quickly. Bureaucracy does not provide warmth or loyalty, it provides minimal compliance at maximum cost. Men recognize this earlier because they have always known institutions are not allies. Men learn not to trust systems that promise fairness while delivering penalties. So they reduced exposure. They stopped forming obligations that could be leveraged against them. They stopped tying their futures to structures that no longer served mutual benefit. This is why men walking away feels so sudden. It was not sudden, it was cumulative. Every legal change that increased risk, every cultural message that framed men as unnecessary, every social trend that rewarded extraction over cooperation added another weight. Eventually, the scale tipped. What women are now experiencing is not abandonment, it is absence. Men did not leave families en masse, they stopped forming them. And absence is harder to process than betrayal because there is no villain to confront. There is only an empty space where expectations used to be. This absence also reveals how much invisible labor men contributed without recognition. Not just financial labor, but emotional containment, decision making under pressure, and long term risk absorption. When men step away, those pressures do not disappear, they land elsewhere. Many women now find themselves carrying burdens they were never prepared to carry alone. Financial planning for decades instead of years. Health planning without backup, emotional regulation without partnership, crisis management without shared responsibility. None of this makes women incapable. It makes the load heavier. And heavy loads wear people down. Another consequence of this shift is the erosion of mentorship and protection that men historically provided, often quietly. Men buffered women from the harshest consequences of failure. They absorbed risk. They intervened when systems became hostile. When men disengage, women face institutions directly without mediation. This is why we see increasing frustration with everything from dating to healthcare to employment. The world feels colder because it is colder without shared responsibility. Men did not make the world harsh, but they often softened it for the people they cared about. Now that incentive is gone. Men are no longer motivated to take on that role because the cost outweighed the reward. Responsibility without authority, obligation without appreciation, risk without protection. No rational person sustains that indefinitely. As men simplified their lives, they became more resilient. Fewer dependencies mean fewer points of failure. Men learn to live with less because less is easier to maintain. This is why economic instability affects men differently. A minimalist lifestyle absorbs shock better than a complex one. Women, by contrast, were encouraged toward complexity, career advancement, lifestyle inflation, social expectations, constant performance. Complexity requires constant energy. When energy runs low, collapse follows. This is not about morality, it is about systems engineering. Simple systems fail slowly, complex systems fail suddenly. We are now watching complex personal lives collide with unstable economic conditions. And many women are realizing that the structure they relied on was never designed to last without partnership. Another uncomfortable truth is that many women believed they could delay commitment indefinitely because options would always exist. This assumption was reinforced by attention, dating apps, and social validation. What those tools never showed was the expiration curve. Attention is not commitment. Interest is not investment. Visibility is not security. Men who were willing to invest long term did so earlier in life. They paired off. They built quietly. The men who remain visible later are often not seeking the same things. This creates a mismatch that no amount of optimism can fix. When women express frustration about the quality of available men, what they are often reacting to is timing, not character. The men who wanted to build were dismissed earlier. The men who remain now have learned not to. This is not punishment, it is consequence. Men did not coordinate this withdrawal. They arrived at it independently through lived experience. That makes it far more permanent. Movements dissolve, conclusions endure. The more women demand men return to old roles without addressing why men left, the less likely reconciliation becomes. You cannot shame people into sacrifice. You cannot guilt people into risk, especially not people who have already tasted peace. Peace changes priorities permanently. Men who have built quiet, controlled lives are not eager to reintroduce chaos. They are not interested in proving their worth to systems that denied it. They are not motivated by narratives that failed them. This is why appeals to nostalgia fail. The past is not coming back. The question is whether a new equilibrium can form, but a new equilibrium requires honesty about differences, accountability for choices, and mutual respect. None of those can exist in a culture that rewards denial. Women must confront the reality that independence is not synonymous with happiness. Men must acknowledge that disengagement, while protective, has broader consequences. Both truths can coexist. What cannot continue is pretending that the collapse of family formation has no cost. It does. And it is paid slowly, invisibly, and personally. One of the most dangerous lies told over the past 50 years. was that you can have everything, just not all at once. In reality, life is a series of doors. When you walk through one, others close. Choosing one path is not wrong, but pretending it does not close alternatives is self deception. Women were told they could build careers first and families later without consequence. That was never universally true. It was selectively true for a minority with exceptional circumstances. Selling that exception as the rule misled millions. Men were told they could be endlessly adaptable, that they could absorb infinite change. That was never true either. Men reached their threshold and stepped back. Now we are left with a social landscape filled with unmet expectations and unresolved tension. The loneliness many women feel now is not just personal, it is structural. It is the result of systems that prioritized individual achievement over collective stability. And once that structure erodes, rebuilding it is exponentially harder. Children are another missing piece rarely discussed honestly. A society without families produces fewer children. Fewer children mean fewer future workers. Fewer workers mean higher taxes and lower support for aging populations. This creates pressure that lands disproportionately on women who live longer and require more care later in life. Men who live simply can adjust. Women facing these realities alone feel trapped. Again, this is not about superiority, it is about alignment between lifestyle and biology. When systems ignore human differences, suffering increases. The tragic irony is that many women rejected men to avoid vulnerability, only to face a future that is far more vulnerable. Working indefinitely is not freedom, it is obligation without relief. Aging alone is not independence, it is exposure. Men saw this and opted out early, and they reduced needs, reduced expectations, reduced dependency. And by doing so, they reduced stress. Women were encouraged to increase needs, increase expectations, increase visibility, and that increased stress. Now, both are living the results. The question society refuses to ask is simple: was the experiment worth it? And if not, what comes next? Because pretending this is temporary delays adaptation, and delay increases damage. The question that now hangs in the air is whether reconciliation is even possible. Not in a romantic sense, but at a societal level. Can men and women realign after so many years of divergence, or has the distance grown too wide? To answer that honestly, you have to understand what would be required for men to re engage, and why so many believe that window has already closed. Men do not walk away lightly. Walking away is not the first instinct, it is the last. Men endure long periods of dissatisfaction before disengaging, especially when they believe responsibility rests on their shoulders. What pushed men to step back was not disagreement, but accumulated evidence that participation only increased risk without increasing reward. For reconciliation to occur, the underlying incentives would need to change. Risk would need to be balanced. Accountability would need to be mutual. Respect would need to be real rather than performative. And perhaps most importantly, trust would need to be restored. Trust is not rebuilt through demands, it is rebuilt through consistency over time. This is where many women underestimate the depth of the shift. They assume men are reacting emotionally and will eventually return once conditions improve. But men are not waiting for conditions to improve. They have already adapted to new conditions. Their lives now function without the structures they once relied on. Reintroducing those structures would require sacrificing peace for uncertainty. That is a difficult sell. Men who have adjusted their expectations downward experience less disappointment. Men who have simplified their lives experience fewer points of conflict. Men who have learned to self regulate emotionally are not searching for validation externally. These adaptations make men resilient, but also resistant to reintegration into systems that previously caused harm. This is why appeals that rely on guilt fail. Guilt works on people who feel dependent. Men who are no longer dependent do not respond to it. Appeals that rely on nostalgia fail as well, because the past included vulnerabilities men are unwilling to revisit. The reality is that many men no longer believe the system can be fixed. They believe it must be avoided. Women, on the other hand, often believe the solution is enforcement, new rules, new expectations, new pressures, but enforcement without cooperation accelerates collapse. You cannot legislate attraction. You cannot mandate investment. You cannot compel people to assume risk they have already calculated as unacceptable. This difference in strategy reveals a deeper divide. Men respond to incentives. Women respond to narratives. When narratives no longer align with incentives, behavior shifts regardless of belief. For decades, the narrative promised women safety without dependence and men relevance without authority. Neither promise held. Men lost authority but retained responsibility. Women gained autonomy but lost support. Both sides now feel betrayed, but men responded by leaving while women responded by demanding change. Demanding change from someone who has already left does nothing. That's it. Another factor often ignored is that men did not leave society entirely. They left certain interactions. They still work, they still contribute economically, they still pay taxes. They simply withdrew from roles that require disproportionate sacrifice. This makes their absence harder to address because it is selective, not absolute. Men still exist everywhere. They just stopped offering what they were told was unnecessary. This selective withdrawal created a vacuum that institutions attempted to fill. Dating platforms tried to engineer compatibility. Governments expanded social programs. Employers pushed diversity initiatives. None of these replaced what was lost because they addressed symptoms rather than incentives. You cannot substitute organic cooperation with artificial structures. Cooperation emerges when both parties benefit. Remove mutual benefit, and cooperation becomes obligation. Obligation breeds resentment, and men recognize this and opted out. Women now face the uncomfortable task of adapting to a world where many of the assumptions they relied on no longer apply. Dating markets are colder, professional environments are more competitive, social support is thinner, expectations remain high, but buffers are gone. This is why we see a rise in anxiety, burnout, and dissatisfaction. Not because women are incapable, but because the workload has increased without relief. Carrying everything alone is exhausting over time. Some women will adapt successfully. They will build alternative support networks. They will recalibrate expectations. They will accept trade offs and move forward with clarity. Others will remain stuck between narratives and reality, frustrated by outcomes they were never prepared for. Men are watching this unfold without celebration or intervention, not because they lack empathy, but because intervention previously resulted in punishment. Men learned that stepping in creates liability. Silence became safer. This silence is often misinterpreted as indifference. It is not. It is boundary enforcement. And men are enforcing boundaries at scale. One of the hardest truths to accept is that many men no longer see themselves as part of a collective mission that includes women. They see their mission as personal, self preservation, stability, peace, purpose on their own terms. This does not mean men reject companionship entirely. It means companionship must align with their life rather than disrupt it. The bar is higher because the cost of disruption is known. Women often ask why standards have changed. They have not changed. Men simply stopped ignoring red flags. They stopped rationalizing instability. They stopped hoping effort would be reciprocated. Experience taught them otherwise. This shift has long term consequences that are not yet fully visible. A society where large numbers of men disengage from family formation experiences demographic decline, aging populations, shrinking workforces, increased tax burdens, reduced innovation. These pressures compound over time. Women feel these pressures earlier because they are more exposed to social and economic volatility. Men insulate themselves by minimizing needs. Again, this is not superiority, it is adaptation. The painful irony is that many women now want the very stability they were encouraged to dismiss. They want partnership, they want shared burden, they want reliability. But wanting something later does not guarantee availability. Timing matters. Men who were willing to build when conditions were different are no longer interested now that conditions have worsened. Trust once broken is not easily restored. And for many men, trust was broken repeatedly. This is why conversations framed around blame fail. Blame does not rebuild trust, it deepens defensiveness. What is required instead is acknowledgement of trade offs, acknowledgement of mistakes, acknowledgement of differences that cannot be erased. But acknowledgement is difficult because it threatens identity. Many women built their sense of self around narratives of independence and strength. Admitting those narratives had blind spots feels like personal failure, even when it is not. Men face a different identity challenge. Re engaging would require vulnerability without assurance. Men have learned that vulnerability can be weaponized. That lesson is not easily unlearned. This creates a stalemate. The stalemate is not dramatic, it is quiet. Fewer marriages, fewer births, more single households, more people working longer, more institutional reliance, less community cohesion. This is the future, unless something changes fundamentally. And change cannot come from slogans. It cannot come from enforcement. It cannot come from denial. It must come from realignment of incentives and expectations on both sides. Men would need assurance that effort will be respected, not penalized. Women would need to accept accountability for choices without externalizing consequence. Both would need to recognize that equality does not mean sameness. Sameness was the illusion that collapsed cooperation. As long as differences are treated as defects rather than realities, friction will continue. The question then becomes whether society is willing to tell the truth, even when it is uncomfortable. Whether leaders, media, and institutions are willing to admit that some experiments failed. Whether people are willing to recalibrate rather than double down. Men have already recalibrated. Women are in the process of doing so, whether they realize it or not. Those who adapt early will find footing, those who resist will feel increasing strain. The story unfolding now is not about victory or defeat, it is about alignment with reality. Reality does not negotiate, it responds to behavior. Men responded by leaving systems that harm them. Women are now responding to the absence of those systems by reassessing their choices. What comes next depends on whether reassessment leads to humility or entitlement, cooperation or coercion, adaptation or denial. At this stage, the conversation has to move from analysis to reality. Not ideology, not nostalgia, not anger, but reality. The question many women are now quietly asking is not why this happened, but what can realistically be done now? That question matters because it determines whether the future is navigated with clarity or bitterness. The first and most difficult step is acceptance. Acceptance does not mean approval. It does not mean self blame. It means acknowledging the situation as it exists, not as it was promised to be. Many women were sold a story that emphasized limitless choice without emphasizing finite time. Accepting that time matters is painful, but it is also freeing. You stop chasing illusions and start working with what remains. For women in their 30s and 40s, the path forward looks different than the path that was advertised in their 20s. That does not mean it is empty. It means it requires recalibration. Expectations must align with reality. Priorities must be reordered. And most importantly, decisions must be made intentionally rather than reactively. One of the most important realizations is that resentment destroys optionality. Anger narrows choices. Bitterness repels cooperation. Whether women like it or not, the emotional posture they carry into the next phase of life will determine outcomes more than credentials or income. Men who are still open to partnership are highly sensitive to emotional climate. They have learned to avoid environments that feel adversarial. This is where many women struggle. They feel justified in their frustration, and often they are. But justification does not produce results. Behavior does. The women who adapt best are not those who deny what happened or lash out at those who left. They are the ones who quietly reassess, simplify, and rebuild around what actually matters to them now. That often means letting go of status chasing, letting go of comparison, letting go of narratives that no longer serve. For some women, this means accepting that motherhood may look different than expected or may not happen at all. That realization is deeply painful and deserves compassion, not mockery. But pretending it can be reversed does not help. Acceptance allows grief to resolve into peace. Resistance prolongs suffering. For others, it means reevaluating what kind of partnership they are actually seeking. Many women were conditioned to see men as interchangeable providers or accessories to a lifestyle. That framing no longer works in a world where men have options to disengage entirely. Partnership now requires reciprocity, humility, and shared responsibility. This is a hard adjustment because it requires relinquishing leverage that once existed. Men are no longer competing en masse for approval. They are selective, they are cautious, they are outcome focused. This changes the dynamic entirely. Women who understand this stop demanding and start aligning. They focus on being emotionally stable, cooperative, and grounded rather than impressive. They recognize that peace is more valuable than performance. They understand that attraction is not negotiated, it is felt. Another critical adjustment involves lifestyle. Many women were encouraged to inflate their lives. Bigger apartments, more expensive habits, constant travel, visibility as identity. These choices require continuous income and energy. As stability becomes more important than appearance, simplifying becomes a survival strategy. Simplification is not failure, it is intelligence under constraint. Women who reduce expenses, lower stress, and build sustainable routines feel better physically and mentally. This makes them more resilient to economic pressure and less dependent on systems that are increasingly unreliable. It also shifts internal validation away from external applause. Men who walked away did this early. Women are now learning it under pressure. The lesson is the same. Another overlooked factor is community. As traditional family structures weaken, intentional community becomes more important. Women who invest in small, reliable networks fare better than those who rely on broad social validation. Depth matters more than breadth. This also applies to friendships. Many women assumed friendships would replace family. In reality, friendships often thin out as life diverges. Friends prioritize partners, children, or relocation. Expecting friendships to function like family without shared obligation leads to disappointment. Building community requires contribution, reliability, and time. It cannot be rushed. Women who approach this intentionally rather than passively build stronger foundations for the future. Career is another area requiring honesty. Many women tied identity to professional success because it was measurable and praised. But careers rarely love you back. At some point, work must become a tool rather than a substitute for meaning. Women who transition from career identity to career utility experience less burnout and more agency. This does not mean quitting work. It means reframing it. Work supports life. Life does not exist to support work. Health also becomes central at this stage. Without a partner to share care, women must prioritize physical and mental well being proactively. This includes sleep, nutrition, movement, and stress management. Neglecting health now compounds problems later. Men walking away often discovered that reducing relational stress improved their health dramatically. Women now face the opportunity to do the same by reducing unnecessary emotional and social strain. What about reconciliation? Is it possible at the individual level, even if it feels impossible at scale? The answer is yes, but only under specific conditions. Reconciliation requires humility on both sides. For women, it requires acknowledging that some narratives were incomplete. For men, it requires distinguishing individual women from systems that harm them. This is difficult but not impossible. The women most likely to find partnership going forward are those who do not lead with entitlement or grievance. They lead with calm, curiosity, and accountability. They do not demand protection. They offer peace. This is not submission, it is strategy. Men value peace because they fought hard to obtain it. Anyone who threatens it is screened out quickly. This is why so many women feel invisible now. It is not that men cannot see them, it is that men are no longer searching. Attracting someone who is not searching requires alignment, not pursuit. This shift is uncomfortable because it reverses expectations. Women were taught they would always be pursued. That assumption no longer holds. Accepting this reality without resentment is one of the hardest adjustments. Some women will reject this entirely and double down on independence. That path is valid if chosen consciously. Independence can be fulfilling if expectations are adjusted accordingly. The danger lies in expecting independence to deliver the benefits of partnership without its responsibilities. Independence means self reliance, full stop. Others will seek partnership with a different mindset. They will approach men as collaborators rather than resources. They will value stability over status. They will understand that shared burden creates resilience. Both paths require honesty. What destroys people is clinging to incompatible desires, wanting independence and protection simultaneously, wanting authority without responsibility, wanting outcomes without trade offs. The men who walked away resolved this tension by choosing one path clearly. That clarity is why they appear calm. Women now face the same choice. At a broader level, society will continue to feel strain as long as this tension remains unresolved. Institutions cannot replace families indefinitely. Social programs cannot scale infinitely. Something will give. The likely outcome is not dramatic collapse, but gradual hardening. Life becomes more transactional. Support becomes conditional. Relationships become rarer, but more intentional. Those who adapt early will navigate this world more comfortably. Those who resist will feel increasingly alienated. The future belongs to people who accept reality quickly and act decisively. This does not mean abandoning compassion. It means applying compassion without illusion. It means telling the truth without cruelty. It means understanding that good intentions do not override consequences. Men walking away was not an attack, it was an adaptation. Women now adapting is not defeat, it is survival. As we look ahead over the next decade, the direction becomes clearer, even if the destination still feels uncertain. The choices people make now will quietly determine whether the future feels manageable or relentlessly difficult. This is not about prediction in a dramatic sense, it is about trajectory. Small decisions compound, cultural patterns harden, systems respond to behavior, not intention. If current trends continue, the world will not suddenly collapse, it will narrow. Options will reduce, margins for error will shrink, life will demand more precision and less improvisation. People who built resilient structures early will absorb pressure more easily. People who delayed adaptation will feel increasingly cornered. For women, this means the next 10 years are less about expansion and more about consolidation. The era of assuming endless optionality is ending. The era of intentional living is beginning, whether welcomed or resisted. This does not mean joy disappears. It means joy must be built deliberately rather than stumbled into. Women who align their lives with sustainable rhythms will fare better. Those who simplify finances, stabilize health, cultivate reliable relationships, and let go of performative expectations will experience more peace. Those who cling to narratives that no longer match reality will experience ongoing frustration. Men will continue doing what they have been doing, minimizing exposure, preserving autonomy, protecting peace. They will not be drawn back by guilt or pressure. If they re engage, it will be because conditions genuinely changed, not because demands intensified. This is a critical distinction. Men do not respond to noise, they respond to structure, they respond to incentives, they respond to consistency over time. Any attempt to reverse this trend without addressing root causes will fail. The idea that men will simply return because society needs them misunderstands how men operate. Men have never felt needed by society, they have felt used by it. When use exceeds meaning, withdrawal follows. Women, on the other hand, often felt validated by society while being quietly abandoned by it. That validation masked vulnerability. Now that mask is slipping. The future, therefore, belongs to individuals, not narratives. People who build lives grounded in reality rather than ideology will navigate what comes next with more stability. Those who outsource meaning to movements, institutions, or slogans will find themselves repeatedly disappointed. One of the most important shifts that must happen is an honest conversation about trade offs. Life is trade offs. Every choice closes some doors. Pretending otherwise creates resentment when those doors close anyway. Truth spoken early prevents regret later. Young women need honesty, not comfort. Young men need respect, not suspicion. Both need clarity more than encouragement. Encouragement without truth is manipulation, even when intentions are good. If there is one lesson to extract from everything discussed here, it is this: cooperation works when it is mutual, independence works when it is complete. Confusion arises when people expect one to deliver the benefits of the other. Many women expected independence to deliver security, fulfillment, and connection simultaneously. Many men were expected to deliver sacrifice without authority or appreciation. Both expectations were unrealistic. Both collapsed. What replaces them must be simpler, more honest, and more grounded. For women, that means choosing paths with eyes open, not assuming safety nets will appear later, not assuming time is infinitely flexible, not assuming institutions will compensate for personal decisions. Responsibility must be owned fully. For men, it means deciding whether peace is enough or whether legacy still matters, whether solitude satisfies long term or whether selective partnership is worth the risk. That decision will be personal and varied. There will be no collective answer. Society will likely become more polarized in outcomes. Some people will live quietly stable lives, others will struggle visibly. This gap will widen based on adaptability, not virtue. The era of one size fits all advice is ending. Context matters, biology matters, timing matters, incentives matter. Ignoring these truths produces suffering. There is no villain in this story. There is no hero either. There are only choices interacting with reality. Women did not ruin society. Men did not abandon it out of malice. Both responded to incentives placed in front of them. Now those incentives are changing again. What matters is how people respond this time. Resentment will not help. Denial will not help. Nostalgia will not help. Only clear thinking, honest self assessment, and deliberate action will help. For women who feel behind, the worst response is panic. Panic leads to poor decisions. Calm evaluation leads to better outcomes. Even when options narrow, there are still options. They just require realism instead of fantasy. For men who feel disengaged, the worst response is bitterness. Bitterness corrodes peace. Boundaries do not require hostility. Withdrawal does not require contempt. The healthiest futures will belong to those who move forward without needing the past to validate them. As economic pressure increases, as social systems strain, as isolation becomes more visible, people will either learn to cooperate again in healthier ways or retreat further into individual survival. Which outcome dominates depends on how honestly this moment is confronted. The uncomfortable truth is that many lessons were learned too late for some. That does not make them useless. Late lessons still matter. They still prevent further damage. The world ahead will reward resilience over image, stability over excitement, and peace over performance. Those values may not trend on social media, but they sustain real lives. Men walking away was a signal, not of hatred, but of exhaustion. Women now adjusting is another signal, not of failure, but of awakening. Whether these signals lead to renewal or further fragmentation depends on whether people are willing to let go of illusions that no longer serve them. The era of pretending differences do not exist is over. The era of pretending time does not matter is over. The era of pretending consequences can be outsourced is over. What remains is choice. Choose clarity over comfort. Choose responsibility over resentment. Choose reality over narrative. And that is the path forward, whether it is easy or not. And I want to hear from you. What did you think about what we discussed today? Do you agree with this perspective or do you see it differently? Leave a comment and share your thoughts because this conversation matters and it is not happening honestly enough. Like the video, if you like it, don't forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.